Hello and welcome to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast number 42. This week, more feedback from the Day of the Doctor, and a look at much-loved Third Doctor companion Jo Grant. But before I get into all of that, I wanted to thank those of you who responded to the comments I made in last week's podcast about the future of the show. I've received a lot of encouragement about the show, and I'm looking forward to the future. As you'll be able to tell from the number of this week's show, Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast is nearing its first anniversary. I'll admit that when I set out back in January, I never expected to still be podcasting a year down the line. But thanks to you all for listening and making the show worthwhile. With that in mind, I'm looking at the possibility of posting the show directly to the pages that have liked the Facebook page, on the basis that if you've liked the page, you must be at least a little bit interested in the podcast. If you prefer me not to post to your page, please let me know, and I'll do my best to remember not to. And now on to this week's feedback, and what a mailbag it's been.
Come here, you scrumptious little beauty. A box?
Doctor, what is it?
I've got mail.
Following my comments on last week's show, I had two humongous bits of feedback through the Facebook page, so here goes. First up was Douglas J. Harkins, who said, I hadn't seen your previous post, but I loved the special. I watched it first time at the cinema and then again on the small screen, and I must say it was much better to see in the cinema. I loved it. I enjoyed the way that John, David and Matt interacted. I thought the Zygons were well done and I was glad to see them back. My favourite part would have to be the curator. I can't help but think the ending may be more ironic than realised. They all stated that they didn't know where the painting Gallifrey Falls No More came from. Could it be that when the curator hinted to the Doctor his new direction is to find Gallifrey, that the Doctor was standing in front of Gallifrey at the time? I like your thinking there, Douglas. For me, Tom Baker's appearance was the standout moment in a special that had so much for the long-term fan like myself to enjoy. And to answer your unasked question, yes, I really do think Tom Baker was playing the Fourth Doctor here. Douglas went on to say, if you count the meta-crisis as a regeneration, then don't you then also have to count the Sisters of Khan giving the elixir to the Fourth Doctor in the brain of Morbius? This would mean that Matt is 14. I agree, the meta-crisis doesn't count. But I also think you do have to count John Hurt. A regeneration is a regeneration by any other name, whether it's Doctor, War Doctor or John Smith. My thoughts exactly, Douglas, though interestingly this week I understand that Moffat has been quoted in Doctor Who magazine as saying that Matt Smith is now Doctor number 13. I can only assume from that the Moff is, albeit incorrectly, counting the Meta-Crisis Doctor. Regular listeners will know that I don't hold Stephen Moffat in very high regard as far as Doctor Who is concerned, and his messing with the canon of the show is one reason for this. For me, the Moff has treated Doctor Who like his own personal plaything, and in so doing has disrespected a large section of the show's fans. Next to feedback was Michael Doyle, who said, your question about if what you're doing is worth it, yes, it is. For me, it's an interesting look across the pond at a UK fan's ideas of the show. Also, not everyone is as gregarious as others, but I'd wager they do appreciate it. Thanks for that, Michael. Your thoughts and encouragements are very, very much appreciated. He went on to say, one of the things I noticed about the Foreman sign is that it was correct, and most like the original. There were two other episodes that went back to it, Attack of the Cybermen and Remembrance of the Daleks, but both of those signs were wrong. Your mention of the scarf reminds me that I saw somewhere, and I forget where, that the curator gave Osgood that scarf, but I haven't seen any truth to that. Have you heard, and do you know? Well, I've got to be honest, I've not heard anything along those lines, but I would be interested to hear if anyone has. Message me on the Facebook page if you know anything. Michael went on, I understand your reservation about not having Rose there versus what they did with the moment, taking her form to communicate with the Doctor. I realise a large proportion of the fans do feel that way, or at least that's what I gather from the comments on various pages. And most, like you, liked it but felt it missed that one thing. I didn't see from you or any others a dislike, more of a would have preferred kind of thing. And going into it, I shared the anticipation that Moffat would have had the intros between Rose and Clara just like those from Sarah Jane and Rose. I, on the other hand, was happy to see Moffat present me with an idea I hadn't known would exist. As the Doctor said, it's nice not to know everything. And what I saw was the ultimate Rose, the only bad wolf with that much power since the parting of the ways. Plus, although Tennant didn't have scenes with her, she had scenes with him, and those scenes I felt were golden. The looks she shot at him, the pain in her eyes, the happiness at the kissing line. Rose was there. The Doctor could see her. Michael also makes reference to the name-calling between the Doctors being like that from the three Doctors. A dandy and a clown, goodbye Scarecrow, fancy pants, and of course in the Day of the Doctor we had Dicky Bow and Chinny. He says, I couldn't stop laughing. He then went on to offer several spellings of that Norfolk town Cromer, which by the way is Cromer, before saying, sorry, but sometimes across the pond means it's difficult to understand the language, that whole two countries same language thing. Either way, thank you. You're the only one who mentioned the link to the three Doctors, and I couldn't understand what she was saying, so I didn't get the reference, but still loved that deft way of dealing with the 70s-80s issue, also mentioned in Tennant's The Sontaran Stratagem. It's interesting that you raised the language issue, Michael, as I've already heard one other English podcast refer to that line as asking for the Kronos file. So believe me, it's not just you guys over there that struggled to hear what was actually said at that point. Michael continues, although his fascination with all things Fez really begins with Smith, McCoy wears one in Silver Nemesis. Yep, quite right too, he does, and many fans actually miss the fact that Seven was the first Fez-wearing Doctor. As he starts to conclude his feedback, Michael observes, I don't know about the gallery being old Baker's TARDIS, that would mean a working chameleon circuit. It's more likely art to remind him. I agree with your regeneration numbering. I agree about the partial regeneration concept. For those who missed last week's show, I pointed out that you cannot count the meta-crisis as a regeneration. Michael goes on, now it's time for the Valeyard. That idea would be good foil for a few seasons. And finally, in relation to some new ideas for Big Finish audios, Michael says, not only would it be great if Eccleston agreed to do audio stories, but there are loads of John Hurt stories now too. How amazing would that be? Also, with Night of the Doctor, there must be some amazing Time War stories with McGann to get to where he was by Night of the Doctor. Moffat has done a really amazing job of opening up that universe. Well, yes, I have to agree with all of that, Michael, and we can only hope that Big Finish are granted the licence to explore all of those possibilities. And that's all for this week's feedback. As always, if you have anything you'd like to say about the podcast itself, or about the topic we're looking at, please feel free to post to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast on Facebook, or email me at respectthething@outlook.com. And now on to our character for this week. Catherine Ann Katie Manning was born on the 14th of October 1946 in Guildford in England, and is best known for her part as companion Jo Grant in Doctor Who. She's also made many theatre appearances, and is now an Australian citizen. But in 2009, Katie Manning moved back to the UK to pursue new acting work, and currently lives in London. Her father was sports columnist J.L. Manning, OBE. As a result of a car accident, Manning spent a year in hospital at age 16, but by 18 had moved to America, where she was offered a 5-year contract with MGM. Returning to Great Britain, Manning trained at the Webber Douglas Academy of Dramatic Art, then joined a Wolverhampton repertory company and made her debut in Man at the Top in 1970. She played the part of Jo Grant from 1971 to 1973, alongside Jon Pertwee's third Doctor. Manning struck up an immediate rapport with her co-stars Jon Pertwee, Nicholas Courtney, John Levine, Richard Franklin and Roger Delgado. Her connection with Doctor Who continues to this day, as she voices Jo Grant in the Companion Chronicles audio adventures, and she's also the voice of Time Lord Iris Wildtime in several Big Finish audio plays. In October 2010, Manning reprised her role as Jo Jones, née Grant, in the 4th series of the Doctor Who spin-off The Sarah Jane Adventures, in the 2-part story entitled Death of the Doctor, with Matt Smith as the Doctor. In November 2013, she appeared in the one-off 50th anniversary comedy homage The Five-ish Doctors reboot. With the deaths of Elizabeth Sladen in April 2011 and Caroline John in 2012, Manning sadly is the last surviving companion of the third Doctor. Katie Manning wrote the TV series Private Wives and has been involved in other writing and directing projects. In 1980 she toured in Peter Turson's VE Night alongside Ian Cullen and Jane Goddard. In Australia she appeared in the play Run for Your Wife, which toured the country. She has also appeared in the low-budget film noir When Darkness Falls in 2005. In June and July 2007, she appeared as Yvette in the stage show version of British sitcom Hello Hello, alongside Gordon Kay as René Artois in Brisbane. In 2011, she appeared as Blodwyn Morgan, a Welsh busybody and clairvoyant in the touring stage play Death by Fatal Murder. In 2009, Manning returned to the UK for her one-woman show Me and Jezebel. The play is based on a true 1985 story about Bette Davis inviting herself to a fan's house for a night and staying for a month, with Manning playing all the parts. The show received a 5-star review in the Edinburgh Evening News, which described Manning as one of Britain's best actresses. But what of the character of Jo herself? Josephine Jo Grant was introduced by Barry Letts and Terence Dicks in the first episode of Doctor Who's 8th season in 1971 as a new companion for the Third Doctor. After the Doctor's previous companion Liz Shaw, a scientist and intellectual, the production team looked to introduce a less experienced companion to act as an audience surrogate. Within the series narrative, Jo is a junior civilian operative for UNIT assigned to the Doctor. Once the Doctor regains use of the TARDIS, Jo accompanies him on his travels. She departs the Doctor's company in the 1973 serial The Green Death, having fallen in love with Professor Clifford Jones. On television, she next encounters the Doctor over 30 years later in the 2010 Sarah Jane Adventures serial The Death of the Doctor. Manning and Pertwee enjoyed a very close working relationship. Manning felt that this added to the success of the partnership between Jo and the Third Doctor. Though her character was criticised for not being a progressive interpretation of a woman, Manning felt that both feminism was not a contemporary concern, and Jo had her virtues aside from her intelligence, such as her loyalty. The character's exit is generally considered one of the most emotional high points in Doctor Who's history. So much so, in fact, that Russell T Davies felt some pressure to remain true to this exit when reintroducing the character in 2010. Jo first appears in the 1971 serial Terror of the Autons, having been assigned to the Doctor as a replacement for Liz Shaw. Apparently she gained her assignment to UNIT because her uncle, a high-ranking civil servant, had pulled some strings. The Brigadier assigns her to the Doctor, who is initially dismayed when he finds out that she's not a scientist, but accepts her because he doesn't have the heart to tell her otherwise. An enthusiastic, bubbly and sometimes scatterbrained blonde, Jo soon endears herself to the other members of UNIT, especially Captain Mike Yates and Sergeant Benton. The Doctor is also particularly attached to her, and she is devoted to him, refusing to leave his side even when mortal danger is involved. And there's plenty of danger to go round as well, especially after the Time Lords restore the Third Doctor's ability to travel through time and space. Jo faces the hazards and wonders of travel with the Doctor with courage and plucky determination. Together with the Doctor and UNIT, she encounters such perils as killer daffodils, time-eating monsters and the Master. She's miniaturised, hypnotised, flung through time, nearly aged to death and menaced by giant maggots and ancient demons. Over time, Jo grows more confident and mature until she's independent enough to stand up to the Doctor, which she does in her last serial, The Green Death. During the events of that story, Jo falls in love with Professor Clifford Jones, a young Nobel Prize-winning scientist, leading to an environmentalist group. At the end, she agrees to marry Jones and go with him to the Amazon to study its vegetation, the news of which the Doctor greets with a mixture of both pride and sadness. Jo, now Jo Jones, returned in 2 episodes of the 4th series of the Sarah Jane Adventures, entitled The Death of the Doctor, in 2010, meeting her replacement companion Sarah Jane Smith for the first time, and subsequently the current Doctor. Jo is still married and travels with her grandson Santiago. She's envious of Sarah Jane for having several Doctor encounters since her departure, but has herself led a fulfilling life, travelling the world promoting humanitarian and ecological causes. After returning her to London, the Doctor does disclose to Jo that he secretly visited her at a time he thought that she might be dying.
I can't waste any more time. Things to do, places to go.
And that's all we have time for this week. As always, thanks for listening, and if you do have any feedback on the show, feel free to post it to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast on Facebook, or email me at respectthething@outlook.com. So until next week, when we'll be reviewing some Tom Baker Big Finish audio and 3 more of the Destiny of the Doctor series.
Well, goodbye, my boy. You did quite well. Quite well. It's reassuring to know that my future is in safe hands.
Thank you for listening to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all copyright and property of the BBC, and no infringement is intended.